The envelope felt heavier than it should have. James Crawford stood in the dimly lit corridor of Windsor Castle, staring at the cream-colored paper in his hands. His name was written across the front in elegant script. Not printed, handwritten, by someone who had been dead for 3 months. Queen Elizabeth. The air in the castle felt different. That October morning in 2022, colder, emptier. James had served as a royal guard for 17 years, but he had never been summoned to the private secretary's office before. Never been handed something like this. She left specific instructions, the secretary had said, his voice barely above a whisper. This was to be given to you personally. No one else has seen it. James's fingers trembled as he broke the royal seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and folded beneath it, something that made his breath catch. A map hand-drawn, aged. The ink had faded to a soft brown, but the lines were unmistakable. It showed the lower levels of Windsor Castle. Areas James knew well. In one area he didn't, a corridor that shouldn't exist. His eyes moved to the letter. The Queen's words were brief but clear. James, if you are reading this, then I have passed. There is something beneath the castle that must not be forgotten. I trust you to see it. Tell no one until you understand why. The entrance is behind the portrait of King George III in the blue drawing room. Go at night. Go alone. If you're watching this and want to know what James found, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. This story gets deeper than anyone could imagine. James read the letter 3 times. His heart pounded in his chest. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of misunderstanding. The Queen wouldn't have kept secrets like this. Would she? But the seal was real. The handwriting was real. And the map in his hands felt like it was burning through his skin. That night James waited until the castle was silent. The other guards were making their rounds on the upper floors. The staff had gone home. The tourists were long gone. He moved through the shadows, his footsteps echoing softly on the stone floors. The blue drawing room was dark. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting silver beams across the furniture. James approached the portrait of King George III. It was massive, ornate, the kind of painting that had hung in the same spot for 200 years. He pressed against the frame. Just as the map had indicated, nothing happened. He tried again, pushing harder. Still nothing. Then he noticed the small symbol carved into the bottom corner of the frame. A rose. He pressed it. A soft click echoed through the room. The portrait swung inward like a door. Behind it was darkness. A narrow stone staircase spiraled down into the earth. The air that rushed up smelled old, stale, like a tomb that hadn't been opened in decades. James pulled out his flashlight. His hand was shaking. Every instinct told him to walk away, to report this, to let someone else handle it. But the Queen had chosen him. She had trusted him. He stepped through the opening and began to descend into the darkness. Asterisk, the stairs seemed endless. James counted 43 steps before they finally leveled out into a narrow tunnel. The walls were rough stone, carved straight through the bedrock beneath Windsor Castle. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing centuries of dust floating in the air. The temperature had dropped. He could see his breath now, small clouds forming with each exhale. The tunnel stretched ahead, disappearing into blackness. There were no lights, no signs. Nothing that suggested anyone had been down here in years, decades maybe. James pulled out the Queen's map again. According to the drawing, the tunnel ran east beneath the castle grounds for approximately 200 feet before opening into a chamber. She had marked the chamber with a small star. Nothing else. No explanation. No warning. His footsteps echoed as he moved forward. The sound bounced off the walls, creating strange whispers that made his skin crawl. He thought about the letter again. Tell no one until you understand why. What was down here that required such secrecy? The tunnel curved slightly to the left. James's light caught something on the wall. He stopped. Moved closer. It was a marking. Carved into the stone, a date. World War II. His mind raced. Windsor Castle had been used during the war. The royal family had stayed here while London was bombed. He knew that much from history. But secret tunnels? No one had ever mentioned secret tunnels. He kept walking. More markings appeared on the walls. Scratches, tally marks, as if someone had been counting days or keeping track of something. Then he saw the door. It was made of heavy iron, rusted at the edges but still solid. A large lock hung from the handle, but when James touched it, it fell away. The metal had corroded through. He pulled the door open slowly. The hinges screamed in protest, the sound echoing back through the tunnel like a warning. The chamber beyond was larger than he expected, perhaps 30 feet across. The ceiling arched high above, supported by thick stone columns, and everywhere covering every surface were files. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls. Wooden crates were stacked in the corners. Papers were arranged on a long table in the center of the room. Everything was covered in dust, but beneath it, James could see that someone had organized this space carefully. Methodically, he approached the table. The papers were yellowed and brittle, but the text was still legible. His eyes scanned the first document. War Cabinet Meeting. September 1940. Discussion of potential invasion scenarios. Contingency plans for royal family evacuation. James's hands trembled as he picked up another document. Security Protocol 7, in the event of castle breach. The following individuals are to be relocated to the underground facility immediately. Underground facility. This place. He moved to one of the filing cabinets and pulled open a drawer. Inside were hundreds of files, each labeled with names. He recognized some of them: Churchill, Eisenhower, Montgomery, but there were others he didn't know. Codenames, perhaps. One file was thicker than the rest. It sat alone in the bottom drawer, separated from the others. The label simply read, Operation Legacy. James pulled it out and opened it on the table. Inside were photographs. Black and white images of people he didn't recognize. Men in military uniforms, women in plain clothes, children, dozens of children. Beneath the photographs was a handwritten note. The same elegant script from the Queen's letter. These are the ones we saved, the ones history forgot. May God forgive us for what we had to keep secret. James's throat tightened. His eyes moved to the next page. It was a list. Names, ages, countries of origin. Poland, France, Netherlands, Belgium, all dated between 1940 and 1944. Jewish refugees. The chamber suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. James realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just a wartime bunker. This was a record, a hidden archive of something the royal family had done during the war, something they had kept secret for 80 years. But why? Why hide this? He turned to the last page in the file. Another handwritten note. Recent. The ink was still black. James, what you see here is the truth of what we did when the world was burning. We saved them. Hundreds of them. But we could not let it be known. Politics. Diplomacy. The reasons no longer matter. What matters is that you know, and that someone remembers. It was signed simply, Elizabeth R. James stood in the silence, surrounded by ghosts and secrets. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The Queen had run a secret rescue operation during the war, hidden Jewish refugees, kept them safe beneath the castle. And then, when the war ended, she had buried the evidence, not out of shame, out of necessity. But there was more. He could feel it. The chamber had other doors, other rooms branching off into the darkness, and something told him the story didn't end in 1945. James set the file down carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. His mind was racing. The royal family had saved Jewish refugees during the war, hidden them beneath Windsor Castle. It was extraordinary, noble. But why keep it secret? Why not let the world know? It would have been celebrated, honored, unless there was more to the story. He looked at the other doors in the chamber. There were 3 of them, evenly spaced along the far wall. All closed. All waiting. The Queen's map only showed this main chamber. Whatever was beyond those doors, she hadn't drawn. Or maybe she had run out of space. Or maybe she wanted him to discover it himself. James approached the first door. It was wooden, reinforced with iron bands. He pushed it open slowly. The room beyond was small, personal. There were beds. 6 of them. Narrow cots with thin mattresses still made up with blankets. A small table sat in the corner with a pitcher and basin. On the wall, someone had drawn pictures. Children's drawings. A house. A dog. A family holding hands. His chest tightened. People had lived here. Hidden here. For how long? Weeks? Months? He moved to the second door. Another sleeping chamber. This one larger. More beds. More drawings on the walls. There was a shelf with books, worn and faded. He picked one up. The Wind in the Willows. The pages were soft from being read over and over. Someone had written in the front cover, "For Sarah May, you find peace in these words." Elizabeth Regina. The Queen had given books to the children hiding in her castle. James felt tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He had served the crown for 17 years. He had stood guard during ceremonies and state dinners. He had protected the royal family from threats and dangers. But he had never truly understood who they were until now. He approached the third door. This one was different, heavier, with a stronger lock. But like the others, time had weakened it. James forced it open. The room inside made him stop breathing. It was an office, a command center. Maps covered the walls, not just of Windsor Castle, but of all of England, of Europe. Red pins marked locations across the continent. Lines connected them like a web. On the desk was a radio, old, military grade, and next to it, a logbook. James opened it carefully. The entries began in September 1940. The handwriting was precise, clinical. Each entry documented a rescue, a transport, an arrival. September 14th, 1940. 3 children from Paris, ages 7, 9, and 11, parents deceased. Transported via fishing vessel to Dover. Arrived Windsor, 0300 hours. Condition: malnourished, but stable. October 2nd, 1940. Family of 5 from Amsterdam. Forged papers. Routed through Belgium and France. Arrived Windsor, 2,200 hours. Father wounded during escape. Medical attention provided. November 18th, 1940. 2 elderly women from Warsaw. Sole survivors of their neighborhood. Transported via underground network. Arrived Windsor 0400 hours. Condition: traumatized but safe. Page after page. Entry after entry. The logbook documented hundreds of rescues, all coordinated from this room, all hidden beneath the castle. But who had run this operation? The Queen would have been just a teenager during the war, too young to orchestrate something this massive. James flipped to the front of the logbook. On the first page, written in bold letters, was a name. King George VI. The Queen's father, of course. He had been king during the war. He and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. They had run this operation together, risked everything, used their resources, their connections, their power to save people the world had abandoned, and they had never told anyone. James sat down in the dusty chair. His legs felt weak. He looked at the maps on the wall. The pins marked safe houses, routes, contacts, an entire network spanning across occupied Europe, all funneling to this one location, Windsor Castle. The symbol of British power and tradition had been a sanctuary, a hiding place, a last hope for hundreds of people who had nowhere else to turn. But the entry stopped in April 1945, when the war in Europe ended. The final entry was brief. April 30th, 1945, the last family departed today. Destination: America. New names. New lives. Our work here is done. May God watch over them all. This record must be sealed. What we did was right, but the world is not ready to know. Perhaps one day. George R. James closed the logbook. His hands were shaking. He understood now. The royal family had operated outside official channels, outside government knowledge. They had used their position and influence to save people without permission. Without authorization, it was illegal. Technically, treason. Even if it was the most human, most compassionate thing anyone could have done, if the truth had come out during the war, it could have caused a political crisis, endangered the other refugees, compromised the network, so they had kept silent, done the work in darkness, and then buried the evidence. For 80 years, this secret had been kept, passed down, protected, until the Queen, in her final days, had decided that someone needed to know. Someone needed to remember, and she had chosen James. But as he stood to leave, his flashlight caught something else. Another door. Hidden behind a filing cabinet, smaller, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. James hesitated. He had found what the Queen wanted him to see. The rescue operation. The refugees. The truth, but something pulled him toward that hidden door. A feeling in his gut that told him the story wasn't complete yet. He moved the filing cabinet aside. The door was unlocked. And when he opened it, he found stairs, leading down, deeper into the earth, into a darkness that felt older, heavier, more dangerous. The Queen's letter hadn't mentioned this. James knew he should stop, turn back. He had found what the Queen wanted him to find, but the stairs pulled at him like gravity. He descended slowly, his flashlight beam bouncing off stone walls that felt older than the chambers above. The air changed. It smelled of earth and water, something ancient. These passages weren't built during World War II. They were much, much older, medieval perhaps, or earlier. The stairs ended in a narrow corridor. The ceiling was lower here, forcing James to duck his head. The walls were lined with rough-cut stone. No markings. No dates. Just cold, silent rock that had stood for centuries. He moved forward carefully. The corridor twisted and turned, following the natural contours of the bedrock. His instincts screamed at him to go back. This wasn't part of the Queen's plan. This was something else. But he kept walking. The corridor opened into another chamber. Smaller than the war room above, but older. Much older. And in the center of the room stood something that made James's blood run cold. A stone altar. It was rectangular, waist-high, with symbols carved into its surface. Symbols he didn't recognize. Around it, the floor was marked with faded paint. Circles, geometric patterns, the kind of thing that belonged in history books about ancient rituals. James approached slowly. His light fell on the altar's surface. There were grooves carved into the stone, channels that led to a small basin at one end. For collecting something, blood maybe. His stomach turned. On the wall behind the altar was a carving, a large circular symbol with a crown at the center, and beneath it, words in Latin. James's Latin was rusty, but he could make out enough. Sanguis, regum, custodia, aeterna. Blood of kings, eternal guardian. This wasn't a refuge. This was something else entirely. Something darker. James backed away from the altar. His mind raced. This chamber had to be hundreds of years old. Predating the castle itself? Maybe. Some kind of ritual site. But what was it doing here? And why was it connected to the war chambers above? He heard something. A soft sound. Like breathing, James spun around, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing, just shadows and stone. But the sound came again. From deeper in the chamber, from a corner he hadn't explored yet, he moved toward it, every muscle in his body tense. His hand instinctively went to his belt, where his radio should have been. But he had left it upstairs. He was alone down here, completely alone. The breathing grew louder, more labored, and then he saw it. A figure. Sitting against the wall, motionless. James's heart nearly stopped. He raised his flashlight. His hand shaking so badly the beam danced across the walls. The figure was a man. Old, ancient almost. He wore tattered clothes that might have once been fine but were now rotted and gray. His skin was pale, papery. His eyes were closed, dead. He had to be dead. But then the man's chest rose, fell, rose again, breathing. James stumbled backward. His mind couldn't process what he was seeing. How long had this man been down here? Days, weeks? Impossible. No one could survive that long without food or water. The man's eyes opened slowly. They were cloudy, unfocused. But they found James, locked onto him, and then the man spoke. His voice was a whisper, dry as dust. How are you? Shouldn't be here. James's voice caught in his throat. He forced words out. Who are you? The man's lips cracked into something that might have been a smile. A guardian, like my father, and his father before him. Guardian of what? The man's eyes drifted to the altar. The old crown, the real crown, the one that came before all others. James felt like the walls were closing in. I don't understand. The Tudors knew, the man whispered. The Stuarts knew. Every king and queen since has known. There is power in blood, royal blood, and it must be protected, kept separate, pure. This was insane. James was listening to the ravings of a dying man, or worse, someone who had gone mad down in the darkness. But the man continued. When the war came, they used these tunnels to save the refugees. Noble work, human work. But they didn't know about this chamber, about what lies beneath. What lies beneath? James asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The man's eyes grew distant. The old ways, the binding. The treaty made 1,000 years ago when the first kings were crowned. Blood for power, protection for sacrifice. The crown is more than gold and jewels. It's a contract. James backed toward the corridor. This man was clearly unwell, delusional. He needed help, medical attention. But something made him pause. Who knows you're down here? The man's smile widened, showing yellowed teeth. She knew. Elizabeth knew. She brought me food, water, for years. Kept me alive, kept the secret. As her father did before her, as every monarch has done, that's impossible. Is it? The man's eyes sharpened suddenly, cutting through the fog of confusion. Why do you think she gave you that map? Why do you think she chose you? Not a historian? Not a scholar. A guard. Someone who understands duty, loyalty, secrets. James felt cold sweat running down his back. She wanted me to find the refugees. The rescue operation? That's all. The man shook his head slowly. She wanted you to find everything. To understand the full truth, the light and the shadow, the mercy and the cost. Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to decide. Decide what? The man's breathing grew more labored. His time was running out. Whether to continue or to let it end. The binding weakens. Every generation, it weakens. But there is still time. Still a choice. James's mind reeled. None of this made sense. Ancient rituals. Blood magic. Guardians hidden beneath the castle. It sounded like fiction, like something from a Gothic novel, but he was standing in this chamber, looking at this dying man, surrounded by evidence of something that had been kept secret for centuries. The man reached into his tattered shirt and pulled out something, a small leather pouch. He held it out to James with a trembling hand. Take it. Read it. Then decide. But decide quickly. Time is running out. James hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave. To run back up those stairs and seal this place forever. To forget everything he'd seen. But he took the pouch. The moment his fingers closed around it, the man exhaled one final time. His eyes closed. His hand dropped. And the guardian died. James stood in the silence, holding the pouch, surrounded by centuries of secrets. Above him, Windsor Castle slept, unaware of the darkness beneath. unaware of what had been protected, hidden, and guarded for 1,000 years. He opened the pouch with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, old, fragile, covered in handwriting that dated back centuries. And as James read the words, he understood why the Queen had chosen him, why someone had to know, and why the truth would change everything. The parchment trembled in James's hands as he read by flashlight. The text was written in Middle English, difficult but not impossible to decipher, and what it described made his skin crawl. It was a contract, a binding agreement, written in the year 1066, the same year William the Conqueror had claimed the English throne. But this document told a different story, according to the parchment. William hadn't simply taken the crown through conquest. He had made a deal with something, some force or entity that the text referred to only as the Old Ones, in exchange for power, protection, and the divine right to rule. William had agreed to certain terms. The royal bloodline would be protected. England would never fall to invasion. The monarchy would endure through centuries of war, plague, and revolution. But there was a price. Every generation a guardian would be chosen, someone from the bloodline itself, but removed from succession, hidden, forgotten. They would live beneath the throne, performing rituals that kept the binding strong, feeding it with the one thing it required: royal blood, not murder, not sacrifice in the traditional sense, but a life given willingly. A member of the family who would spend their years in darkness, sustaining the ancient power that protected the crown. James felt sick. This couldn't be real. It was too insane. Too medieval, but the guardian's body was still warm behind him. The chamber was real. The altar was real. And the Queen had led him here deliberately. He read further. The document listed names, guardians through history. Most were distant cousins, illegitimate children, members of the royal family who had been erased from official records. Each one had served for decades before being replaced by the next. The last name on the list was written in different ink. More recent, Thomas Windsor. Born 1951, chosen 1973. Service continues. That was the man who had just died. 51 years in the darkness, sustaining something that shouldn't exist. James's hands shook so badly, he almost dropped the parchment. He forced himself to keep reading. The final section described the consequences of breaking the binding. If the ritual stopped, if no guardian replaced the last, the protection would fail. Slowly at first, then catastrophically. The document didn't specify exactly what would happen, but the language was clear. England would fall. James wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as superstition and madness, but he couldn't, because for 1,000 years, England had survived. Through invasions that destroyed other nations, through plagues that decimated populations, through wars that reshaped continents, the British monarchy had endured when every other royal house in Europe had fallen or faded. Coincidence? Or something else? He folded the parchment carefully and placed it back in the pouch. His mind was spinning. The Queen had known about this. Of course she had. Every monarch knew. It was passed down like the crown itself. A secret burden. A terrible responsibility. And in her final months, she had decided that someone outside the family needed to know. James looked at the guardian's body, at the altar, at the ancient chamber that had stood beneath Windsor Castle for centuries. He thought about the refugees upstairs, the children who had been saved, the compassion and courage it had taken to hide them, feed them, protect them. That was real too. That was also part of the monarchy's legacy. Light and shadow, mercy and darkness, all bound together in the same bloodline. James climbed back up the stairs slowly. His legs felt like lead. He moved through the war chambers, past the beds where children had slept, past the logbooks documenting hundreds of lives saved. He returned to the main tunnel and made his way back to the hidden entrance. When he emerged into the blue drawing room, dawn was breaking through the windows. Pink light spilled across the floor. The castle was waking up. In a few hours, tourists would fill these halls. Guards would change shifts. Life would continue as normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. James returned to his quarters and sat on his bed, still holding the leather pouch. He had a choice to make. The same choice the Queen had wanted him to understand. He could seal the tunnel, destroy the map, bury the secret forever. Let the binding break. Let whatever protected England fade away. It was an old magic, a dark magic. The modern world had no place for such things, or he could protect it. Find someone to take the guardian's place. Continue the ritual. Sustain the binding for another generation. Keep England safe, even if the cost was terrible. The Queen hadn't told him what to do. She had only wanted him to know. To understand the full truth, the mercy and the burden. The light and the darkness both were real. Both mattered. James thought about his 17 years of service. About the oath he had taken to protect the crown. Not just the people who wore it, but everything it represented. History, tradition, continuity, protection. He looked at the pouch in his hands. Then, at his reflection in the small mirror on his wall, he saw an ordinary man, a guard, someone who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. But the Queen had trusted him, had chosen him specifically. And now he understood why. Because sometimes the people who protect the truth aren't the ones in power. They're the ones standing quietly in the background, the ones who understand duty, loyalty, sacrifice, the ones who can bear the weight of terrible knowledge. James stood up slowly. He knew what he had to do. Not because it was easy, not because it made sense, but because some responsibilities once given couldn't be refused. He would protect the secret. Not the ritual itself that could end, should end perhaps, but the knowledge, the history, the full truth of what the monarchy had been, both good and terrible. He would document everything, write it down, seal it away for the future, so that one day, when the world was ready, people could understand the complete story. The refugees who had been saved, and the guardians who had been sacrificed. The compassion and the cruelty, the humanity and the horror. All of it because that was the truth of power. It was never simple, never pure. It was always complicated by the choices people made in darkness, by the prices they paid for protection, by the costs they hid from the world. James took out a pen and paper and began to write. Not for today, not for himself, but for whoever would find his words decades from now. For whoever would need to make the next choice. And as he wrote, the sun rose fully over Windsor Castle, bathing the ancient stones in golden light. Unaware of the secrets they held beneath, 3 days later, James stood before the private secretary once again. The office was the same mahogany desk, the same portrait of the Queen on the wall, watching with those knowing eyes. But everything felt different now. "You've been requested to provide a report," the secretary said, his voice careful, measured. "About the envelope Her Majesty left for you." James had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed his words 100 times. "The Queen wanted me to know about the war effort," he said calmly. "About the refugees who were hidden here during World War II, she left documentation. Evidence of a rescue operation that was kept secret for 80 years. The secretary's expression didn't change. But something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Or relief. "And that's all you found?" James held his gaze. "That's all that matters. What the royal family did during the war was extraordinary, courageous. It saved hundreds of lives. The world should know that story." The secretary nodded slowly. Her Majesty's final wish was that the truth be preserved, but carefully, with discretion. "I understand. Do you?" The secretary leaned forward slightly. "Because there are truths that inspire and truths that destroy. Knowing which is which requires wisdom." James thought about the guardian's body, still lying in the chamber below, about the ancient ritual that had sustained the monarchy for 1,000 years, about the choice he had made. "The Queen trusted me to know the difference," he said quietly. "I won't betray that trust." The secretary studied him for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and removed a folder. He slid it across the desk. "There will be a ceremony next month. Historians will be invited to examine certain documents from the war period. You will be present as a witness. Your testimony will be recorded. The story of the refugees will be told. And the rest." "What rest?" The secretary's voice was soft but firm. "Her Majesty left you a map to a war archive. Nothing more. Nothing less." James picked up the folder. Inside were photographs of the logbooks, copies of the rescue records, everything needed to tell the story of courage and compassion, everything that would make the Queen's legacy shine even brighter. The darkness would remain buried for now. "One more thing," the secretary said as James stood to leave. "Her Majesty left something else for you. Personal, not official." He handed James a small wooden box. Simple, unadorned. James waited until he was back in his quarters to open it. Inside was a letter, short, written in the Queen's own hand. "Dear James, if you are reading this, then you have seen everything. The light and the shadow, the mercy and the cost. I do not envy you the burden of that knowledge, but I trust that you will carry it with wisdom. The world needs heroes. It needs stories of courage that inspire hope. Give them that story. As for the rest, let sleeping stones lie. Some secrets protect us by remaining secret, not because they are shameful, but because they are too heavy for the world to carry. You understand this now. Thank you for your service, for your discretion, and for your strength. When the time comes, and you will know when pass this burden to someone worthy, as I have passed it to you. With gratitude and faith, Elizabeth R." Beneath the letter was a key, small iron. Old James knew what it opened. The portrait in the blue drawing room, the entrance to the tunnels. He was the keeper now, the guardian of the Queen's final secret. He sat in silence for a long time, holding the key. Outside his window, tourists walked through the castle grounds, taking photographs, marveling at the history surrounding them. They saw the towers and the stones and the pageantry. They didn't see what lay beneath, and maybe that was right. Maybe some truths were meant to stay hidden, not because they were lies, but because they were too complex for simple understanding, too nuanced for sound bites and headlines. The world would learn about the refugees, about the brave rescue operation, about the compassion of the royal family during the darkest days of the war. That story would inspire, would teach, would remind people that even in times of horror, humanity could shine through. The other story, the ancient ritual, the guardian, the binding would remain where it belonged. In the darkness, waiting for the next person who needed to understand the full cost of power, James placed the key in a locked drawer. He would keep it safe, would check the tunnels regularly, would ensure that the guardian's body was handled with dignity, even if no one could ever know who he really was, and he would wait. For the day when he grew old, when his service was coming to an end, when he would need to find someone else to pass the burden to, someone strong enough to carry it, someone wise enough to protect it, someone loyal enough to never betray it. Just as the Queen had found him, the cycle would continue, as it had for 1,000 years, as it would for 1,000 more, hidden, protected, sustained by people who understood that duty sometimes meant carrying impossible weight alone. James closed the wooden box and locked it away. Then he put on his uniform, straightened his shoulders, and went back to his post. To anyone watching, he was just a guard, standing quietly, doing his job, unremarkable and forgettable. But beneath his calm exterior, he carried the weight of centuries, the burden of terrible knowledge, the responsibility of protecting a secret that could never be told. And as he stood at his post, watching tourists pass by with their cameras and their smiles, he thought about the Queen, about her final gift. Not just the truth, but the trust. She had believed he could handle it, could bear it, could protect it, and he would. For as long as he lived, for as long as the secret needed protecting, because that was the oath he had taken. Not just to guard the crown and the people who wore it, but to guard the truth itself, in all its complexity, in all its terrible beauty, the light and the shadow, the mercy and the cost, both real, both necessary, both forever intertwined in the story of power. James stood at his post as the sun set over Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, and deep beneath his feet, in chambers that would never appear on any map, the secrets slept, waiting, watching, enduring, as they always had, as they always would, until the next guardian came, until the next choice had to be made, until the next person was ready to learn that the truth is never simple, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is knowing what to keep hidden, not for shame, not for power, but for protection, for all of us.